I sold the beach house my grandparents left me after my siblings tried to force me to let them use it whenever they wanted without contributing to maintenance. Now they're calling me the family traitor. I never expected to be in this position, writing about my family's implosion over what should have been a treasured inheritance. But here I am, trying to make sense of how a beloved beach house turned into the catalyst for destroying decades of family bonds, or maybe just exposing what was broken all along. I'm the youngest of 3 siblings, 34F, with my brother Mark, 38M, and sister Sarah, 36F, completing our supposedly tight-knit family unit. Growing up, we weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable thanks to our parents' endless work ethic. They both worked demanding jobs in healthcare, which meant we spent a lot of time with our grandparents, especially during summers at their beach house in Maine. The house itself wasn't particularly grand, a weathered 3-story colonial with faded blue shutters and a wraparound porch that had seen better days. But to me, it was magic. While Mark and Sarah usually spent their time glued to their phones or complaining about the spotty internet, I was my grandparents' constant shadow. I helped Grandpa repair loose shingles, learned the intricacies of the ancient heating system, and spent countless hours in the kitchen with Grandma, perfecting her clam chowder recipe while watching storms roll in over the Atlantic. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs years ago. Whenever something needed fixing, my siblings were mysteriously busy. When Grandpa's health started failing 5 years ago, I was the one who drove up every other weekend to help with maintenance. Mark would say his kids' sports schedules were too demanding, while Sarah always had some work emergency. Yet they never missed a chance to host their friends there during peak summer weeks, leaving me to clean up the aftermath. When our grandparents passed away last year, Grandma in February, Grandpa following just 3 months later, everyone said they couldn't bear to be apart. The family gathered for what would become the match that lit the powder keg. The will reading was supposed to be straightforward. Everyone knew our grandparents had substantial assets: the beach house, their city apartment, a significant stock portfolio, and various smaller investments. The shock came when their lawyer revealed that instead of splitting everything equally, they had made specific bequests. I got the beach house, Mark received their stock portfolio, worth considerably more than the house, and Sarah inherited their recently renovated city apartment. At first, there were tears and hugs, with everyone agreeing our grandparents had been incredibly generous. But then came the comments that should have warned me about the storm brewing. "Of course, we'll all share the house, right?" Sarah said, her voice carrying that familiar edge I'd learned to dread. "It's not like you'll be using it all the time." Mark chimed in with his own passive-aggressive contribution. "Mom and Dad always said family properties should stay accessible to everyone." I tried to be diplomatic, suggesting we could work out a fair system. "Why don't we sit down and figure out a schedule?" I proposed. "We can split the maintenance costs and property taxes, and make sure everyone gets time during the prime seasons." Their expressions should have told me everything. You'd think I'd suggested selling their organs on the black market. The next few months were a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare. Sarah started planning family reunions at our beach house without consulting me. Mark's wife began posting on Facebook about their upcoming summer plans, tagging the property's location. Neither of them responded to my increasingly desperate emails about the property tax bill or the quote for the new roof that the house desperately needed. Then came the spring inspection. The winter had been brutal, and the house had suffered. The ancient heating system had finally given up the ghost, leading to a burst pipe that damaged the kitchen, Grandma's beloved kitchen where I'd learned all her secrets. The quote for repairs came to $30,000, and that was just for the immediate issues. The inspector recommended another $120,000 in updates over the next 2 years to keep the house structurally sound. When I called a family meeting to discuss the repairs, both siblings showed up with their spouses and attitudes in tow. I laid out the costs, complete with contractor quotes and timeline estimates. Mark scrolled through his phone the entire time, while Sarah interrupted every other sentence with comments about how I was obsessing over money instead of focusing on family. "Look," I finally said, "I can't handle these costs alone. If we want to keep this as a family property, we need to split the expenses 3 ways. That's about $10,000 each for the immediate repairs, plus ongoing maintenance and taxes." Sarah laughed, actually laughed, and said, "That's your problem, sis. You inherited it, you pay for it. But you can't deny family access just because you're bad with money management." Mark finally looked up from his phone to add, "Yeah, Grandpa and Grandma would be horrified to see you trying to profit off family." I reminded them that they'd both sold their inheritances within months. Mark's stock portfolio had funded his new boat, and Sarah had used the apartment proceeds to renovate her primary residence. Apparently, that was different because those weren't family legacy properties. The Memorial Day incident was what finally broke me. I drove up early that Friday to start some basic repairs, only to find both families had already moved in for what they informed me would be a month-long stay. They had made copies of the keys without my permission and brought their friends along too. Over that weekend, I watched in horror as their kids used Grandma's antique dining table for arts and crafts, complete with spilled paint and permanent markers. Sarah's husband decided to fix the dock without any knowledge of marine construction, nearly causing a collapse. Mark's teenage sons took Grandpa's meticulously maintained fishing boat out without permission and managed to damage the propeller on some rocks. The final straw came when I overheard Sarah and Mark in the kitchen, discussing how they could legally force me to either sell them partial ownership at a discount or make me maintain the property while guaranteeing their unlimited access. They were Googling lawyers who specialized in contesting wills, even though the probate period had long passed. I left that Sunday night in tears, but with a clear conscience and a plan. The next morning, I called a realtor who specialized in historic coastal properties. Within a week, we had multiple offers. The couple who eventually bought it, the Hendersons, reminded me so much of my grandparents it hurt. They were retired teachers who had dreamed of running a small bed and breakfast, and they promised to preserve the house's character while giving it the care it deserved. The sale price exceeded everyone's expectations, thanks to the hot real estate market and the property's prime location. I immediately set up college trust funds for all my nieces and nephews, 6 kids in total, putting aside enough to give each of them a full 4-year education at a good school. Another portion went to the local historical society that my grandparents had supported for decades. When news of the sale broke, you'd think I'd committed a war crime. Mark and Sarah showed up at my house, screaming about betrayal. Sarah's husband had to physically restrain her from trying to force her way inside. Mark threatened everything from legal action to making sure you never see your nieces and nephews again. The extended family quickly divided into camps. My mother's sisters supported me, having witnessed similar entitled behavior from my siblings over the years. My father's side of the family, however, joined the chorus calling me a traitor to family values. The family group chat became a battlefield, with people I hadn't heard from in years suddenly having strong opinions about my character. Through it all, my parents remained surprisingly neutral, though Mom pulled me aside at a tense family dinner to whisper, "Grandma would have done the same thing, sweetheart." She didn't suffer fools either. It was the validation I didn't know I needed. 3 months have passed since the sale. The Hendersons send me regular updates about their renovation progress, complete with pictures that both break my heart and heal it. They're keeping the kitchen's vintage cabinets but upgrading the appliances. They found some of Grandma's old recipe cards tucked behind a drawer and mailed them to me. They're even restoring Grandpa's workshop in the basement as a space for local kids to learn woodworking. My siblings still aren't speaking to me, but their silence is preferable to the constant demands and guilt trips. Their kids, however, have begun reaching out secretly. My oldest niece, Mark's daughter Emma, sent me a heartfelt email thanking me for the college fund and confessing that she understood why I sold the house. "Dad and Aunt Sarah never helped with anything," she wrote. "They just wanted the fun parts without the responsibility. Kind of like how they treat everything in life." The Historical Society recently contacted me about their plans for my grandparents' donation. They're creating a permanent exhibit about the area's maritime history, featuring photographs and documents from my grandparents' collection. The curator mentioned that my grandmother had actually been providing them with materials for years, hoping to preserve the region's stories for future generations. Last week, I received an unexpected letter. My grandparents' lawyer, who had retired shortly after handling their will, wrote to share something he felt I should know. Apparently, my grandparents had updated their will 5 years ago, specifically after watching how each of us handled family responsibilities. They had originally planned to split everything equally but changed their minds after seeing who actually cared about preserving their legacy versus who just wanted to profit from it. "Your grandmother," he wrote, "told me she knew you might eventually have to sell the house. She said, our youngest has the best heart but also the best head on her shoulders. She'll know when holding on costs more than letting go." Those words finally let me cry, really cry, for the first time since this all began. I realized that preserving a legacy isn't about keeping physical properties intact. It's about honoring the values and lessons our loved ones tried to teach us. I've started seeing a therapist to work through the family trauma, and she's helping me understand that sometimes the biggest act of love is letting go of what others think you should do and instead doing what you know is right. The beach house was never just about the property, it was about responsibility, respect, and understanding that family means more than taking advantage of each other. Yesterday, I drove past the beach house on my way to visit friends. The Hendersons have repainted it the same shade of blue my grandparents always used, and the garden is blooming with my grandmother's favorite hydrangeas. Through the kitchen window, I could see a family gathered around that old table, properly restored now, sharing a meal and laughing together. It wasn't my family, but it was exactly what that house was always meant to be, a home filled with love and respect. For those wondering if I regret my decision, the answer is no. I miss the house, and I miss the family I thought I had. But I'm proud that I found a way to honor my grandparents' true legacy, not the building itself, but the values they tried to teach us. Sometimes, being called a traitor by people who betrayed the real meaning of family is the best confirmation that you've done the right thing. To my siblings, if you ever read this, the college funds are in irrevocable trusts. Your children will have the opportunity to create their own beautiful memories and build their own legacies through education, which is what Grandma and Grandpa would have wanted all along. And maybe someday, they'll understand that sometimes the biggest act of family loyalty is having the courage to say no to those who would destroy what makes family special in the first place. As for me, I'm learning to create new traditions. Every Sunday, I make Grandma's clam chowder in my own kitchen. It doesn't taste quite the same without the ocean view, but it reminds me that the best parts of our family legacy live on in the lessons they taught us, not the walls that contain them. And somehow, I think that's exactly what they intended all along. It's been a year since I sold my grandparents' beach house, and I felt I owed this community a final update, especially after all the support and advice you've given me. Life has a way of coming full circle sometimes. Last month, I received a call from Sarah. Her voice was different, softer, missing that entitled edge I'd grown so used to. She asked if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us. No spouses, no kids, no lawyers. I chose a quiet cafe by the harbor, one where our grandparents used to take us for hot chocolate after long days at the beach. Sarah was already there when I arrived, looking smaller somehow, more like the sister I remembered from our childhood than the angry woman who'd screamed on my front lawn a year ago. "I owe you an apology," she said, before I'd even sat down. "A big one." She pushed a thick envelope across the table. Inside were dozens of family photos, summers at the beach house, Grandpa teaching us to fish, Grandma in her kitchen. I found these while cleaning out my attic. It made me realize how much we'd lost, and not because you sold the house. Over the next 2 hours, Sarah opened up about everything. Her marriage is ending. Turns out her husband's aggressive stance about the beach house was partly driven by their financial troubles. They'd mortgaged themselves to the hilt renovating their home, and he'd seen the beach house as their safety net. "We were counting on selling our share once we forced you to split ownership," she admitted, staring into her coffee. "I knew it was wrong, but I convinced myself we were entitled to it." The college fund I set up for her kids became a lifeline. With the divorce looming, she'd been lying awake wondering how she'd manage their education. "You took care of them when I was too selfish to think beyond myself," she said, crying now. "Just like you always took care of the beach house when we couldn't be bothered." As for Mark, karma has its own timeline. Remember that boat he bought with his inheritance? It's been sitting in dry dock for months, racking up storage fees. His wife finally gave him an ultimatum: sell it or sell their house. Turns out maintaining a boat is a lot like maintaining a beach house. It takes more than just showing up for the fun parts. The Hendersons have become unexpected bridges in our family's healing process. They started a tradition of hosting an annual community day at the house, inviting local families to learn about the area's history. They asked me to help coordinate the first one, and I agreed, though my hands shook when I first walked back through that front door. But you know what? The house is more alive now than it's been in years. The creaky stairs have been lovingly restored, the gardens are thriving, and the kitchen, oh, that kitchen, still smells like Grandma's bread pudding. Mrs. Henderson found Grandma's old recipe cards and has been baking her way through them, sharing the results with the neighborhood just like Grandma used to do. The Historical Society's exhibit opened last month. They dedicated a whole room to our grandparents' contribution to the community. There's a photo of Grandma and Grandpa on their wedding day standing on that wraparound porch, young and in love, with the ocean behind them. Beside it, they placed something that made me cry, a letter Grandma had written to the society shortly before she passed away. "This house has been more than a building," she wrote. "It's been a keeper of memories, a teacher of lessons, and a test of character. In the end, what matters isn't the walls and windows, but the hearts of those who understand that love means caring for something beyond yourself." Sarah read the letter at the exhibit opening. Mark didn't come, but his wife did, bringing their kids. Emma, my niece who'd supported my decision from the start, is now interning with the Historical Society. She's helping digitize our grandparents' photos and documents, preserving them for future generations in a way that can't be fought over or sold. The college funds are growing steadily. Each of the kids gets quarterly statements, and several have started adding their own savings to the accounts. My youngest nephew, just 12, proudly showed me his contribution, money he'd earned helping neighbors with yard work. "Like you used to help great-grandpa," he said, beaming. As for me, I've found peace with everything, finally. The therapist helped me understand that selling the house wasn't just about ending a toxic situation, it was about honoring my grandparents' true legacy, their values, their wisdom, and their understanding that sometimes love means making hard choices. Last week, Mrs. Henderson invited me over for tea. We sat on the porch watching the waves, and she handed me a small box they'd found during their latest renovation. Inside was Grandma's old key ring, complete with the tarnished brass key to the front door. "We had the locks changed," Mrs. Henderson said, "but we thought you should have this. Some keys unlock more than doors." She was right. That key reminds me that we don't need to possess something to honor it. The real inheritance wasn't the house, it was the lesson about what makes a family strong, what makes a legacy last, and what makes love real. Sarah calls regularly now. We're rebuilding slowly, one coffee date at a time. Mark still isn't speaking to me, but Emma tells me he's started therapy of his own. Maybe someday he'll understand. Until then, I'll keep making Grandma's clam chowder, telling their stories to anyone who'll listen, and remembering that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go. The beach house still stands, its blue shutters bright against the weathered shingles, still catching the last rays of sun over the Atlantic. It's not ours anymore, but somehow, it's exactly what it was always meant to be, a home where memories are treasured, legacies are honored, and love means more than ownership ever could. To everyone who supported me through this journey, thank you. You helped me stand firm when my compass was true but my heart was wavering. And to my grandparents, I finally understand what you were trying to teach us all along. Some inheritances can't be measured in square footage or dollar signs, they're measured in the wisdom to know the difference between holding on and letting go.